I want to start, pull back big picture and think about, I guess really one of the things that interests me so much about your work is your process. So I'm curious about some of your influences to your practice. So because we've positioned like these two generations within the exhibition, I know there are influences, I'm sure, from there, but I would love to hear a little bit about some of those influences.
Sure. First, thank you so much for having me. Jennifer McCabe, you trusted me and brought us on, and it's a spectacular museum with an amazing crew to work with. I feel really fortunate. I wish we could have the 900-person opening you were planning. So I feel really lucky to share it with people in whatever way we get to. Yeah.
Thank you.
So yeah, I've been running around helping install for the past 2-3 days. And because Jennifer's invited me to show my tools, more of my process has been let in. That's actually around the back of that wall. So we can have a photo of it, but it's not in view right now. It's a separate little room. And I think we were talking in the car we were driving, like in a way my process doesn't start with painting at all. It starts with the discipline of like studying ballet as a little kid and studying French and coming out of printmaking in high school. And I studied architecture at Cooper Union. And I worked as an architect in Europe, in New York, and there's a lot of discipline from so many different areas that, I mean, one of these paintings is named Driven. Like, why am I driven to make these works? And I think that they're a byproduct of a certain discipline in so many other ways before I even began to channel it into painting. And so there's both the process of the discipline of showing up to it, and then there separately is the process of how I physically make the paintings, which is also fairly unorthodox because I don't come to painting through painting. Again, it's the back door through architecture, printmaking, dance, filmmaking, not even filmmaking of my own, but influences upon me growing up with it. That I started graduate school and used tracing paper that came from architecture school because I was just used to having piles of trace around. And I used the lid of my gesso jar to like sample the material, to like lay it down as dumbly as it could, kind of holding drawing away from myself because I was so facile at that I would like, in order to learn how to paint, I wanted to take away what I was good at so that I could like study material and see what it would tell me when I wasn't, drawing. And drawing also was travel, and I was trying to hold still. I had traveled a lot. And I started building this material library, and then the dots all started talking to each other. But each dot that I made with my lid of my gesso jar was like gold leaf or miracle grow or horse shit or grass and concrete, and not shopping at art stores, like shopping at Home Depot and wanting to kind of eke out of our like world of substances what I would work with. So I still work with all sorts of weird non-art substances, sort of the surviving ones that are more like archival. And everything I was using started off with like strawberries and coffee and things that were not archival. So, but the whole idea of sourcing from our lives and a lot of road materials, a lot of materials where the metaphor for what the work is about is just loaded into the material itself.
Okay, before we get too far into all the materials, just to back it up a little, because you mentioned architecture, these kind of influences, architecture and discipline and coming to your practice. And I asked a question when we did the artist talk with your mom about the idea of breaking the rules or thinking, we've titled the show Beyond, which is in one sense speaks to the moment we're in and the hope for getting beyond where we are now. Yeah. But also for me, it's thinking beyond the frame, so to speak. So not being afraid to break the rules or go outside the lines or however you want to say it. But I thought it was really interesting because your mom said, oh no, I don't do that. And I thought,
don't break the rules.
Don't break the rules. Yeah. And I thought you must, I mean, do you think you learned some of that
she's also
confidence to break the rules? Do you think you learned some of that from your mom or from your upbringing?
I think there's a lot of rules we do adhere to. I mean, she adheres to Armin Hoffman. And I kind of have that innately in me through her. There's like a ton of rules I'm listening to, but they're not really necessarily the exterior rules that a given situation is handing us. Like we're kind of like educationally coming with a set of, I don't know, could be called rules, could be called baggage, but ways of making decisions. And also she's a contrarian. If you tell her she can't break the rules, she'll break the rules by telling you she does or she doesn't.
Which is a rule breaker.
So she's gonna, she has authority issues. She's gonna flip it on you no matter what you say.
Gotcha. Well, because I think of your paintings are on Mylar, which is not what you would customarily find paintings on. And Barbara has paintings in the next gallery. She doesn't usually do paintings, but because she's done them on canvas and she's done these artworks on canvas with paint, she likes to call them paintings. She doesn't really think of them as paintings. So there's this.
Yeah, I mean, those are a funny series of paintings because in a way, it's like we were joking that they could be called like ce n'est pas une pipe. This is not a ping pong table because they're like an idea of a painting. So they're like kind of a parody of a painting,
right?
Because they're, I mean, these romantic space that's made out of this hard edge ping pong table. And, you know, she did learn, as she would call it, drip and drool at SFAI back in when it was Clifford Still and Diebenkorn and Bischoff. Those were teachers of hers. And they said, never use green. So, of course, she made a whole career out of, like, beryllium green. And those paintings, she wants, I think Von Bartha, who's now representing her, wants them. And she's, like, just stepped into like owning it. We're like, let's title them finally, like, this is not a ping pong table. This is not a painting.
Right.
Where they're sort of conceptually a game and a joke. And that's why the whole idea of playing in front of them, which is something we set up to happen in, I think it was 89?
1990.
Was it 90?
At SMoCA.
Yeah, and Paulo Polidri shut us down because it was not yet cool to have interactive museum exhibitions. And my high school friends and I, we were the plants and we picked up the paddles and he repoed them right away.
So this was an exhibition at SMoCA for visionary architects of the time. And your mother trained as an architect also, and she was invited to the exhibition. So she showed these beautiful drawings from Green Architecture series along with these giant ping pong, or paintings the size of ping pong tables essentially, with the ping pong tables to play, but they weren't allowed to play. And when I saw her exhibition in Palm Springs Museum, I thought this is such a smart combination of works that are and the scale of them is so interesting. And interactive was great about 8 or 9 months ago. So
I know we've come full
so
circle.
fun anymore. But whatever.
We try to space them out, we clean the balls.
Okay, but I want to talk a little bit about the works that we have in the gallery space because we've chosen, or I've chosen to show 2 different arms of your practice. So I would say you're more known for these large scale, they're 8 by 8 foot generally, paintings that are very gestural, abstract. They're layered with different materials, textures. They play with negative space. I'm looking at it behind you, and they're amazing. And then you have an older series, and maybe we can drop in an image of maybe this one. The new narratives, what you call the new narrative series. And in these works, you're writing in them, you're putting words, you're putting very realistic images of people, places, really specific ideas, and very much being critical of our society, of your place within the art world, questioning things, of just being really open about all of these ideas that kind of flood your mind, right? Or challenge you in some way. And when I saw those, I thought there were so many similarities in a way to the larger, more abstract, more gestural works, because I know there are these layers of content even within those. So let's start though with the new narrative series and talk a little bit about the one that we have an image up of.
Okay. That one's driven, and this one's actually love of driving. That one's driven. So that was about the internal drive, and this one's about our love of driving and all the complexity, and we know we're driving ourselves into the ground, and yet we adore it, and it's our whole sense of ourselves and freedom. And the painting brings together all the, like, has the 405 and the 10 doubled, and has the investor meeting and the big chandelier at the Fairmont, and all of the oil pool and the car keys and the whoosh of the whole thing are there to break up and violate the sort of sublime, abstract painting space that I had been playing in for, and known for a long time, a while at least at that point. And I wanted to literally drive through the painting with everything you're not allowed to talk about in painting. Mm-hmm. Some of them are very personal. That one's much more about America and our whole society. And I love driving. It's not a pointing the fingers at somebody else. I'm very much embrace the oxymoron of being a part of the mess. But I wanted to create a big sublime abstract painting that was also going to rip itself apart from the inside and operate it as a painting at the same time as have it deconstruct itself with its own ideas of everything you can't say in a painting. Mm-hmm. So this one's about the art world, definitely something you're not supposed to talk about in painting. The other one is super personal, and it deals with all sorts of forces in life, like escape, love, marriage, friendship, being shunned. I mean, everything you're not allowed to talk about. That was the first one I did. And it just, once I did that, there was kind of no backing off of that. I was like, I kind of have, there's a bunch more paintings after this one that I kind of have to go for. Mm-hmm. But the original impetus was to rip apart the sublime abstract space. Yeah.
That you've embraced.
That I've been, that ways. I revere, mm-hmm. and that I make. Mm-hmm. And that, I love painting, but I also definitely want to take a pot shot at and rip straight through it. And maybe, that has to do with my authority issues that I'm born into.
That you come to fairly, honestly. All right, so let's juxtapose that with one of these. Which one would you?
Well, behind me there's Breaking Up the Concrete Cloud, there's Matchstick, and then there's Rattling the Pipes. And those three all came this summer. So this is a very specific summer in world history. Mm-hmm. And Breaking Up the Concrete Cloud, I had originally wanted to I had this idea as I was moving to LA, knew that I wanted to dump asphalt in the corner of a huge sheet of Mylar, and I'm still technically getting there, and I'm working with a new fabricator who's wonderful, and knowing that I'm making a really heavy one area of a painting as a challenge to him, how are we going to support it? I want vast emptiness and impossible density in the same sheet of Mylar, something I can't pull off without a substructure. Mm-hmm. We hung them today. You can see it's sketchy. And yet we had just been, it was the first night, so I could begin to go to my studio after the quarantine had ended. And the pandemic pretty quickly led into the race riots, mm-hmm. which pretty quickly also had sort of the counter surge of civil liberties and this sort of pendulum of America's swinging mess of contradictions. And that's not something I mean, that's what paintings are made out of. They're I feel like paintings have different roles simultaneously, and different paintings can have different roles, and the same painter can take on different roles. Whether it's going to be the truth about what's happening or an elixir for what's happening. I feel like in the course of painting for this show, and while I was making that movie with Christian Bruno, I actually went through a gear shift. I was making really black paintings that were I use these glass tools, and I drive the paint on the Mylar, and then I turn it, and these sort of interlocking forms, which, you know, it's like every street you go down, you can't go down that, you can't get to here. Like, that's what every train of thought for a little while, everything was happening so quickly for all of us. Yeah. And we're still in a no man's land. It's not like we've arrived somewhere. We're just less bombarded a little bit than we, or maybe a little desensitized after this summer too. But I wanted to catch that raw moment in world history. It's not just even American history. And yeah, it has the hint of a swastika. And yeah, it's like in...
Maybe we can show one of...
I think that if you show Matchstick, that was the first in that series. And still just like making a short movie out of like having filmed making it. And wanting to continually disrupt the painting as I was making the painting. Make the painting out of a series of roadblocks and disruptions until it would just burst outside of itself. The breaking up the concrete cloud was from an impossible area of density and then exploding and ripping it apart. And rattling the pipes, like, is to take the whole same idea and jitter it while it's being made, because the whole thing just started to vibrate as a time.
Can we show the next one of that?
Yeah, this one is
rattling the
pipes. And there's a book that I made while I was making these, because at home I would try to kind of suss out where I was going to take the next moves, and I would just use an ink, big fat brush on the dining room table, like, and every time one would dry, I'd flip the page, and I'd just take this butcher block that was a square that represented the 8x8, and the seam is down the middle of the square, like the 8x8s have. And I would make what's also outside the frame, because I feel like my paintings are always like just a little glimpse of what's actually much bigger and goes outside the frame. So in the sketchbook, I like got to go further. It's a way of making a small thing even bigger than I can make the 8x8. And just repeatedly getting from how I'd get from the curved form into these road blocking forms, and then that kind of exploded through the course of the book and let it get as unruly as it's going to get, and play that out at that scale. I don't usually do sketches, but I kind of needed to because I couldn't leave the house because we're under quarantine, and there's skywriting saying, you know, don't leave the house. And then take those ideas to the studio and play them out. And I kind of like ran out of juice after these three. Like, I made some others, but I didn't think they were good.
Which is it's interesting how things have played out just for this exhibition, because we were meant to open in May, I believe, and we wouldn't be showing half of these works because they were made in the interim of when we moved the exhibition, which we had to do. We're continuing to do it, to move things along and to make plans and to adapt as we go, all of that. Will you talk a little bit about the scale of the works, because they're large, like I said, 8 by 8 feet, and you are, I would describe you as petite. So to physically get across this space is something, right? But you told a kind of an interesting story as to how you felt like you got to the scale of the works. And the idea that you work on the floor. So,
yeah, I mean, I got to this scale during the course of graduate school, and there was a guy who washed buses. And I just thought he was like the greatest painter I'd ever seen. And it was CCA, and they had just built that giant building, and I was collaborating with a guy who was kind of off the hook, and we sort of set up out in public and pushed the like a shopping cart out there, and pretended I would leave at some point if needed. But nobody asked me to leave, and I didn't leave. And I would work from like 3 in the afternoon till 3 in the morning, put on headphones and pretend that I was listening to something when I wasn't, just to like try to blank out. And I was near the vending machines. So, and there was this giant glass wall, and on the other side of that was the guy who washed the buses. And he had this maybe 2.5, 3 foot wide soapy mop on a stick with a swivel, and he would wash the buses with like this grand sweeping gesture with this authority. and urgency. And I remember sitting there like with my little oval tools like on the floor, building these paintings out of momentum, and I hadn't yet gotten to that sweeping shape. And I was like, he's really good. And I would just watch him. And wanting to bring that sort of authority and urgency and unself-conscious dealing with scale, not in a like, oh, it's really big art kind of way, but because I work flat on the ground, like it's not intimidating to scrub an 8-foot kitchen floor. Mm-hmm. So why would it be hard to get a tool? And then I ended up developing these glass tools, which I hadn't done yet. I continually make tools, and I have industrial designers make tools for me that will help me make the mark I'm thinking I want to make, that would let me
extend your hand.
It's extension of my body. Mm-hmm. And I make big architectural tools that are like giant adjustable French curves and things that will let me extend my thoughts into a scale that's like a dance scale, because I do come out of ballet. Right. And I do, like when I climb out and I'm like reaching, like I realize like it's kind of like a surfing move. You know, you're kind of like laying on your belly and you're reaching out. And I think it's all, I run up and down ladders a lot. And I look down and I can correct for the parallax. Like my mom and I have crit each other all her life, well, all my life. And she can't see what something is until it's up. And she can't see what something is when it's half done. But I'm pretty good at being able to run up the ladder and look down and have a pretty good idea what that thing's going to be once it goes up. But she works little and I work big, so it's different.
Right. In the, except for the super graphics, and we have some of those in the gallery, but you both have such a good sense of space and the spatial relationships that happen with a body in the space and with the existing
and it both comes
architecture.
Out of dance. I mean, even you put me up in this beautiful place to stay, and there's this magnificent swimming pools. And as a nod to my mother, who's mostly paralyzed at this point, and she loves to swim, I've been using it like we would jokingly, we'd break into like Versailles, like before it opened, so that we wouldn't have like, you know, fat German tourists in the blue sky. And we would walk on center, and then we would part at the stairs and come back together. And like I swim the laps, and then I go around and I dive in and I go up and use the architecture as a big ballet space, a big dance space. And I think that her way of stringing through space in super graphics, like she and I can talk back and forth kind of through osmosis about how to solve a space, or in a way I put myself into an arena of painting that's intelligible, because now she has a lot of success, but for a while people are like, they don't, you know, she's not animal, vegetable, or mineral, you know? Yeah. And which is a lot of her brilliance, but a lot of what's been missed for a while.
You feel like you've had that informal collaboration over the years?
Definitely.
With her, yeah.
And, you know, I'd stop by her house and give her a crit on the way to the studio. She'd come to my studio and give me a crit. I've been doing that for, you know, off and on for 20, 40 years. Yeah.
Which is, yeah, I love doing things that either haven't been done before, showing works that you haven't shown before. Like when you said to me, well, I've never shown these. Nobody's ever wanted to show them. I was like, well, maybe you don't know who you're talking to, but we're definitely showing those now.
Now that's the challenge. So I'm so happy you're showing these works, because I've held them back. Like I haven't let them sell. Like they need to be shown actually in an institutional context. I think what you wrote about them is great. And it's like they don't make sense until somebody makes sense of them. And I don't want to let them out into the world as objects that are kind of like pretty and mute. That was not the point.
Well, the relationship between these works and the more abstract ones, again, because I don't know if we really dug into this as much as I wanted to, is that there's all this content piled into the narrative works, and there's all this content piled into the abstract works. Definitely. Which is why I think I'm drawn to your process so much, is because there is, like you're talking about, so much testing. We're showing behind the wall of the gallery a snapshot of Nellie's studio space, because she has these test strips with handwritten notes about every material under the sun, really, probably, and you know, hundreds of tools and hundreds of paint bottles. And it's just such a fascinating lovely space that speaks to the thought that you're putting behind every mark of these abstract paintings, behind the materials that go into them, using the road materials.
Yeah.
And what are some of the other materials that you're
I
incorporating?
use soda ash, which makes things corroded. I use crystallina, which gives me like a light interference thing. I use this pounce of a really dry red dirt from Red Rock, and I love that it comes from right outside of Vegas. Like there's just like an irony to that I like the Americana of it. Silicone carbide coarse, silicone carbide fine. One is what's in grip tape. One is what's in the sparkly W sidewalks. I love that, like, those are concrete materials, and that, like, the ex-taqueria guy who I made friends with, his dad was a concrete guy, and he drove me around and found the materials. Like, there's, like, a relationship and life experiences behind piling, you know, gathering all these materials. Mm-hmm. Glass beads, which is a road material. It's what makes the double yellow line reflective. And that sort of sublime, expansive release that we associate with road trips and cars and our love of driving. Like, I want that materially in the work. Like, I only wanted to shop at Home Depot. Mm-hmm. I want to use art materials. I want to use stuff that is loaded with who we are.
Right.
Yeah.
Right. Let's show an image of vitamin D.
Yeah, I keep looking at it.
Yeah, you're looking at that. I'm looking at these. So let's talk about vitamin D, because you describe it as the elixir that comes at the end of all of these kind of tortured moments that we've been living through protests and pandemic and all of that.
I did these with the background noise of and explosions in Inglewood of fireworks for Breonna Taylor. Like, it was very intense and very of a moment, and I could only do them so long. I think it was right in the middle of getting the movie with Christian Bruno, and I was just like, I think I'm done. I don't think I can make another black painting right now. Like, I'm wrung out, and I've been as raw and honest with it as I can be to channel what's been going on within where we are. And I don't want to see it anymore. I don't want to make it anymore. I don't think anybody else needs to see it anymore. That's where painting has a couple different roles. And I think you and I have talked about that a lot. Like, whether it always has to be political, mm-hmm. or whether it's also essential to provide amnesty. And mm-hmm. And like I say, this upcoming Elixir series that I still have a few more in my head that I'm thinking about, where, I mean, this was vitamin D. Like, I wanted to make the surface of the sun, like, to hit you with all of the immunity and sort of restorative vitamins that you could hit somebody with visually. That is what, you know, people are in their little kitchen trying to do to themselves to save themselves from everything that's going on around them. Mm-hmm. I want the painting to operate that way. We were joking earlier. We were all in front of it. There was sunlight streaming on it. We're like, oh, I can feel it.
It has an energy.
What I love about painting is it's not a time-based medium. It unpacks all right away. It either sucks or it's wonderful right away. Mm-hmm. And I want a painting that, like vitamin D is meant to unpack. And finally, that it's hung here and lit well. It's the first time it's operated well. The emptier, cleaner paintings don't operate as well when they're hung badly and lit badly. And they start to operate when they can give you like this wash of color and light and the emptiness that needs to operate in them too. Mm-hmm. Yeah. So yeah, those are the idea of, I mean, it's not only just an idea, but it's like an urgency of creating the medicine after you've gone deep enough into the problem. I don't think it's a gift to continually give people
which we're not out of the problem.
No, we're not. Right? I'm not saying we're out of it. That's far from what I'm going to say. But I do think that at a certain point, like, when is it culture's job to call out the truths, and when is it the job to provide respite, mm-hmm. intelligent respite that acknowledges right. what's going on, but isn't mired in it, isn't drowning. It's like a a raft. Like, so throw somebody a life preserver.
Yeah.
And I intentionally ride back and forth on that. I need it, and I think other people need it. And I don't think it's really that interesting to have a didactic, at least for me, a career that would be like purely didactic and political and socio-political, or that's purely eye candy. And every time I deliver eye candy, there's always a twist. Like, the materials have always got some sort of like, oh, it's not so simple twist.
Which is why I love your work.
Thank you.
Yeah. Is that twist, whether you want to acknowledge it as a viewer or you don't, it's up to you to unpack it a little bit or to just
the titles are
enjoy
sometimes
it.
in code, and even those that are narrative are pretty explicit. They're still in code. I mean, I write, which is less in code, but I do that less publicly yet.
Yeah. Well, I want to be able to open it up for questions. If there are questions, there's a question. If anyone else has questions, you can be thinking about it. We're going to do a little moderation through the Q&A.
I come out of architecture school.
Repeat the question, will
Okay,
you?
the question had to do with Duralar or Mylar, or there's a million different words for it. But it's a drafting vellum, but it's a heavier mill, so you can't just rip it. But I did start on vellum, and I did start on tracing paper, and I gradually found bigger. It was actually really generously Ingrid Kalam, who was showing at the Matrix through Larry Render, who Larry Render gave me her phone number. I called her and I said, what's that stuff? And she gave me the distributor, and I've since moved on because the Mylar has been re-engineered and there's like powder coating and all these, but it's a drafting vellum. I come out of architecture, so it's like the heaviest mill catamat that's made for aerospace design. It used to be able to buy it really cheaply, and it was the runoff pieces that were used for the documents between the Library of Congress. So it was that inert. The pH balance is so stable that that's what they used to save. And also it was used for aerospace design printing, and that's subsequently digitized and no longer necessary. So it's not as cheap or as readily available as it was when I started. And I've tried leaving it, and I tried Canvas, and I spent 3 years on Canvas, and I still do commissions if they come, but I'm really excited about working with my fabricator to take the Mylar pieces that feel so innate to me. It feels like the home base material that I really know how to work with. And then he mounts them and solidifies them, and I'm still working with him how to handle the decals and how to make them join and how to work it all out. We're a year into the journey, love each other, not quite done figuring it out. But we're starting to make them work, and I feel like it's the fruition of where the Mylar has been wanting to go all along. It's an architecture material I feel comfortable in. I am grateful for the momentum, because it is such a rough time to know what you're doing with yourself. And I had just moved to LA. I have a little girl. There was a lot of kismet that led to this show. I mean, I have a dear friend who's with my daughter right now who mopped my floor and said a prayer, and then commissions started rolling in. Oh my God, I just couldn't even make them fast enough, but it was money, so I did it. And then the pandemic hit, but right before that, you invited me to the show. We had the whole studio visit. We were planning the giant 900-person opening, and then the date kept getting pushed back, which allowed me the push that I needed to make these works about the pandemic and about 2020, which is a really loaded and unforgettably complicated time in world history. And I don't know that I would have made these paintings because they were not easy to make. But I do really well with deadlines. Like, it's the architect kid in me, the like ballet dancer, the discipline. Like, you give me a deadline, I'll work really hard right all the way up to it. And it's depressing for me not to have deadlines. So I thank you.
Well, it's really our greatest joy as an institution to be able to commission new works, to provide this kind of space for artists to even think about making a work that is of the moment.
Yeah.
Because that isn't exactly what we were intending in the beginning. But all along, we've had to definitely be flexible. If you're playing the drinking game, we've had to pivot.
I want to know this drinking
so
game
many
called
times.
Pivot.
Maybe it's just an institutional thing. Everyone is always saying, well, we had to pivot when the pandemic hit, and then we had to pivot. But we really did. We changed dates, we changed directions. We talked a lot early on about what it would be like to open an exhibition without the people in the gallery, and how would we handle that? Because no matter everyone's best intentions to open, we had chosen a date for the museum as early as July, and here we are in September, and we're not open yet. And so I appreciated having this dialogue with you, Nellie, about, well, what can we do to make this an interesting experience if people and when people can't come to the gallery space?
Yeah.
Because we know even when we reopen, not everyone will be able to come
Or
want to come. So we built up a virtual side of things, in which you've been referring to the film by Christian Bruno. There will be on our website, we will have, he's already completed a film of Barbara, her life and work, and he's finishing one up on Nellie that was made during this moment, so that will be available. And then again, this artist talk, the three-way artist talk.
Yeah, I think that it's a time when film becomes increasingly more important, and how to figure it out as a medium becomes more urgent, because if we can't be together, people want a clickable triangle. They're laying on their side in bed, and when everybody's been sent to their room, how do we all reconnect?
Thank you, Nellie, so much for being here tonight. I'm glad we had an opportunity to pull together this sort of artist talk. And really thank you, everyone who was able to join us tonight.